If history has taught us anything, it is that the human propensity for evil and brutality knows no bounds, and that when given the opportunity, many in power will choose for their enemies to suffer a slow, painful and agonizing death rather than provide an end that is more humane and swift. And in this video, I'll be going through 3 of the most brutal deaths from history that you wouldn't have learned about in your history class or even on a history YouTube channel, as these are 3 brutal deaths that have been largely forgotten by the world. But before we begin, don't forget, if you want to find out more about the deaths of some of history's greatest figures, then subscribe to my channel, Historical Exit. The first gruesome death that we will be discussing takes place in the 16th century in the heart of a war-torn Europe, where the disharmony between Catholics and Protestants is at an all-time high, and both sides commit gruesome atrocities to bolster their own Christian philosophies. And it is in this turbulent backdrop that Balthasar Gerard finds himself born into in the year 1557. And Balthasar was raised in a devout Catholic household which was not only deeply loyal to the Catholic faith, but also had an unwavering reverence for the Spanish crown as well. And this devotion to crown and king were embedded into Balthasar from a young age, and it would go on to define most of the actions he would take throughout the duration of his life. And one of the greatest detractors and opponents of the Catholics during this time period was Prince William of Orange, a royal who not only hated Catholics but also despised the Spanish king Philip II. Therefore, Balthasar saw it as his divine duty to God and king to eliminate Prince William of Orange once and for all. And in the year 1584, Balthasar would move to the city of Delft, where William of Orange resided, and through meticulous planning and a bit of luck, he was able to gain access to the prince's inner circle. And after many months of faking loyalty to William of Orange, he would end his facade by shooting the prince in the chest at close range, killing him instantly. Balthasar would be immediately arrested and taken to prison, where he would await trial before the magistrates of Delft. And during this trial, Gerard displayed no remorse for his actions, and he was sentenced to first be severely tortured and then executed. And the torture that would follow was considered exceptionally gruesome and barbaric even by those who held sympathies and allegiance to William of Orange, with the first of Balthasar's many punishments being that he was whipped and left to rot outside on a pole for 4 days, with his feet and hands bound together behind him so he would be unable to sleep. And as if that wasn't bad enough already, a 150-kilogram rock was also hung from the big toes of his feet to cause even more pain and suffering to this unrepentant assassin. But that was just to be the start of his trials and tribulations, as on July 15, 1584, Balthasar Gerard would endure a second day of unimaginable pain and torture, by first having his right hand burned off with a red-hot iron. This was then followed by having his flesh torn off with red-hot pincers at 6 different points on his body. And his last and most gruesome punishment would be his execution, which would follow shortly after the torture Balthasar had already endured. And the method of his execution was particularly brutal, as he was sentenced to be quartered alive, which meant his arms and legs were attached to 4 horses, which were whipped to pull him apart in 4 separate directions, resulting in the 4 limbs eventually being ripped apart from the body. But the humiliation and desecration of Balthasar's body did not end there, as after the quartering had been completed, the dismembered body of Balthasar was put on public display, serving as a dire warning to all those that dared to defy the power and authority of the House of Orange. And although Balthasar's death may have been brutal and exceptionally gruesome, he displayed immense bravery in the face of death, never once showing remorse for the death of William of Orange. And the figures next up on our list displayed an equal amount of courage against a needlessly cruel and prolonged death sentence. Next up is one of the most brutal and prolonged executions that would occur during the Salem witch trials, a period in American history where paranoia and false accusations were rampant, and it would often lead to harsh and brutal punishments for any individual accused of being a witch or wizard. And this was something that 81-year-old farmer Giles Corey would unfortunately have to experience firsthand, as this elderly man would face one of the most gruesome and torturous executions in American history at the age of 81. And his misfortunes would begin on the 19th of March 1692, when his wife Martha Corey would be accused of witchcraft, with several young girls claiming that Martha Spector was tormenting them and asking them to sign the devil's book. And based solely on these accusations and no other evidence, Martha Corey would be arrested, and a few weeks later, on April 18, 1692, Giles Corey would also be arrested and brought before the magistrates for interrogation. And during this trial, the afflicted girls exhibited dramatic fits and convulsions whenever Giles moved or spoke. The display of the so-called possessed girls convinced the magistrates that Giles was indeed working with demonic forces, and they questioned Giles Corey on his association with the devil and witchcraft practices. But Giles would vehemently deny any accusations of being a wizard, but would also refuse to plead guilty or not guilty officially on the record, as silence was his best option in that moment. Pleading guilty would mean immediate execution, perhaps even torture first, and pleading not guilty would also most likely result in torture as well, as it would only be by surviving several trials by ordeal that Giles would be able to prove his innocence. Giles would then be imprisoned and held in captivity for 5 months, awaiting his trial before the magistrates of Salem. And after many months languishing in prison, his case would finally go before the grand jury in September of 1692, where nearly a dozen witnesses testified against him. And it was at this crucial moment that Giles Corey would make a decision that would lead to one of the most brutal deaths in American colonial history. And the legal strategy that Corey employed was both brilliant and devastating, as he initially entered a not guilty plea, but then refused to submit to a jury trial, understanding that no one had been acquitted in the previous trials and that conviction was absolutely certain in front of this mock jury. This refusal to take a plea was not an act of madness, but rather a calculated decision to protect his family's inheritance, as Sheriff George Corwin of Salem was illegally seizing property from those convicted of witchcraft, and Giles had already written a will deeding his land to his 2 son-in-laws, ensuring that by refusing to plead, his family would retain his property and wealth. And during this trial, Corey displayed no remorse for his refusal to cooperate, and this enraged the grand jury of Salem so greatly that they decided he would be subjected to a horrific form of punishment known as peine forte et dure, which translates roughly to a strong and hard punishment. And on September 17, 1692, Giles Corey would begin his first of many days of unimaginable pain in a field next to the Salem jail, where he was stripped naked, laid on his back on the bare ground, and Sheriff George Corwin supervised the placement of heavy stones on a board atop of his chest. Official records from Judge Samuel Sewell record that the execution of Giles Corey took over 2 days to complete, with popular folklore stating that the elderly farmer had uttered nothing during this torturous and prolonged execution, except for the words, "more weight." And with this brave and defiant final act, Giles Corey had protected his family's estate and wealth, but had also proven that perhaps some other worldly assistance had enabled him to withstand the pain and torture of his execution for so long without making any sound except for the words, "more weight." And lastly, we will discuss a death so brutal and torturous that it will unleash a new wave of rebellions and armed conflict across the Indian subcontinent during the rule of the Mughal Empire in the 17th century. And this execution would last 7 days, with some of the most barbaric punishments being enforced upon the individual during this week-long process of torture. And the figure we will be discussing is none other than Guru Arjan Dev Ji, the 5th Guru of the Sikhs, and as a Sikh myself, a figure whose death holds a lot of meaning and importance to me and many other Sikhs all across the world. And the misfortunes of Guru Arjan Dev Ji would start in late May of 1606, when Mughal Emperor Jahangir summoned him to Lahore to answer accusations that he had provided shelter and financial assistance to Jahangir's son Khusrau, who had launched a rebellion to overthrow his father and take over the Mughal throne. And based solely on these accusations of supporting a rebellion and also the growing concern that too many Muslims and Hindus were converting to Sikhism due to the Guru's influence, Guru Arjan Dev Ji would be arrested and imprisoned in Lahore fort, where he would face the wrath of an emperor who felt betrayed and angered beyond reason. And during his imprisonment, Emperor Jahangir would demand that the Guru pay a fine of 200,000 rupees, as well as remove certain verses from the Sikh religious scripture, the Adi Granth, that he deemed were offensive to Islam and Islamic thought. Guru Arjan Dev Ji though would vehemently refuse both demands and would not compromise on the sanctity of the Adi Granth under any circumstances, and paying the fine would be an admission of guilt for crimes he did not commit. Therefore, by refusing to comply with the emperor's demands, Guru Arjan Dev Ji would be sentenced to death, but the emperor would make sure the Guru was barbarically tortured for many days before he would at last be executed, perhaps hoping that some pain would break the will of the Sikh Guru. First, the Guru would be imprisoned in a small cell for 4 days and 3 nights, given no food or water during this time. And then would come the first day of physical torment, when a large cauldron was heated till boiling point, and then Guru Arjan Dev Ji was made to sit in this boiling hot water with the fire burning underneath it for hours. This was followed by a second day of torture, which would occur the next morning, when Guru Arjan Dev Ji was made to sit on a large burning hot iron plate that had been heated until it was red hot and glowing. And as if that torture was not enough, red hot sand from a furnace was continuously poured over his bare body and head, causing his skin to blister and burn. And according to historical accounts from both Sikh and Mughal sources, the torture continued for hours, during which the Guru's body was subjected to unrelenting heat and burns. However though, the Guru remained calm and composed throughout the entire ordeal, continuously reciting Sikh hymns and chanting the name of God without once asking for mercy or relief. And after enduring many days of continuous torture, the Guru's body was so severely burned and damaged that the Mughal authorities decided to allow him to take a cooling bath in the nearby Ravi River, perhaps believing that this small mercy would finally break the spirit of the Guru. However, historical accounts state that on that fateful day, as thousands of Sikhs and onlookers watched from the riverbanks, Guru Arjan Dev Ji walked into the waters of the Ravi River, never to be seen again. And with this composed and awe-inspiring death, the Guru would inspire a nation of Sikhs to rebel and become a fierce enemy of the Mughals for centuries to come. So let me know in the comments down below if you found this video on the brutal deaths of 3 little known figures to be interesting and educational. And if you did enjoy this video, please do like and share it with others. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe to my channel, Historical Exits, so you can find out more about the deaths of some of history's greatest figures. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day. Bye.